Okay, well, thank you for having me. I think most of extension agents, we get quite a few calls on hydrangeas, their selection and care. So I actually put together this presentation for my county and am using it today for the Hort webinar with some modifications. Try and make it a little bit shorter. So I feel like the hydrangeas maybe are replacing some of our knockout roses that we lost to the virus. And that might be one of the reasons they've really taken off as a plant that people want for their landscapes. Besides, they are also very showy. So there are 49 species of hydrangeas. There's shrubs, there's vines, and some of them we even can prune up into trees. There's maybe 4 or 6 species that are actually native to North America. And there are about 6 species that are commonly grown in the United States, but pretty much all of them will have roots that are fairly shallow. So a 2 to 3 layer of bark mulch is helpful, and they all like some moisture, but none of them like to sit in saturated soil. So they need moisture, they need a layer of mulch, and also most of them like about 4 hours of morning to mid-afternoon sun. They don't like a real harsh sun. Morning's the preferred time. And most of them work very well as border shrubs and in masses. So these are the main landscape hydrangea species. There's the bigleaf hydrangea, which is also called the French hydrangea, Hydrangea macrophylla. There's a panicled hydrangea, Hydrangea paniculata. There is a smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens, our Oakleaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia. And then I'm going to skip over the Japanese climbing hydrangea. There's a couple of them. There's Anomala, there's Petiolera, but we're not going to cover those today. And then there's the mountain hydrangea, Hydrangea serrata. Okay. So the name hydrangea comes from hydra, referring to water, and Aegean, which refers to a vessel for a vessel for water. It just refers to their love of water. And they have 2 types of flower heads. They have the Mophead, which is actually made up of sterile florets. There will be some inner fertile florets, but they can be very hard for the pollinators to get to. And sometimes those on the bigleaf, they're called hortensias, the ones that have the Mophead. And then there's the Lacecap hydrangea, which has fertile center florets, which are not so showy, and then they're surrounded on the edges by sterile florets that have large sepals, and they're showy. Hydrangeas make good cut flowers and good dried flowers. So the basic care of hydrangeas, most of them are native plants that grow in moist areas. You really want to choose, with most shrubs, one that's appropriate for the space that you're planting, and then you don't have to prune them near as much. If you put the right plant, right size plant in the right space, that really helps you with your gardening. You want to avoid crowding. They don't have a lot of disease issues, but some of them get powdery mildew and a fungal disease, Cercospora. So if you can give them where they're not too crowded and have some air movement around, that can reduce those diseases. They're relatively pest-free. They grow in part shade. Some of them will tolerate full sun if they have good moisture. The flowers generally last 3 to 4 weeks in full sun, but they might not flower as much, but they last longer in part shade. They can go for 6 weeks or more. So the pruning, for the most part, that needs to be done is removing dead wood, deadheading flowers, and then rejuvenating by cutting very old stems at the base of the plant. But we'll talk more about pruning with each species as we go along. And then there are cold sensitive cultivars that can be wrapped for winter protection. They can be caged with leaves. They can have leaves and mulch or compost piled up at their crowns to try and help them over winter. Okay, this is the big topic these days, hydrangeas and pollinators, and the Mount Cuba Center has done quite a bit of research with this. And by far, the Lacecaps attract more pollinators than the big Mopheads. So this is a table, and the star of the show is partway down. It's called Haas Halo. And if you go down the overall ratings, Haas Halo is rated a 5. So, but every Lacecap in there, the pollinator rating, if it's a 3, those are all, I think they're all Lacecaps that got rated a 3 for pollinators. There are some of the Lacecaps that are only a 2, but all the ones that have the pollinators don't go to at all are Mopheads. Okay, and that just shows the chart of how many pollinators visit the flowers of the different varieties. That's online, this research from the Mount Cuba Center, if you want to read it in more detail. Another thing that I've pointed out as I go through here is the Theodore Klein Awards. That's based out of the Udell Gardens. And Wynn Dunwell from UK used to work with it. They post them. They were posted on the UK site, and now they're being posted at Udell. And so they will do plants of merit. And some of these hydrangeas have been nominated as for the Theodore Klein Awards. Deer resistance. Most of them, the deer do like to eat. There is a wild type of bracted hydrangea that's fuzzy. And of course, deer don't like fuzzy things. So, if you really have deer and you really want to plant a hydrangea, a bracted one might be good to try. But the Bigleaf in the mountain and the Cascade have a little bit of resistance. The climbing ones, the deer can't browse them above 6 feet, so that gives them some resistance. But the deer love the Oakleaf hydrangea, the Panicle hydrangeas, and their very favorite are the smooth hydrangeas. So they will eat the flowers off of all of those. Pruning. Blooms can be initiated the previous season, and on some species, they bloom on old wood. And in those cases, you prune after bloom. If the blooms are initiated the current season and it blooms on new growth, then you're going to prune in late winter. Some of the new cultivars will bloom on new and old wood, which complicates things a little, but it also gives you more flexibility. You can survive the cold snaps and still have blooms. Some, like the Oakleaf hydrangeas, we really only bloom as needed. We try and not bloom them very much. And always when you're blooming, you're pruning back to a set of buds. You want to leave some buds for flowers. Okay, so here's the Oakleaf hydrangea, and it is a native, and it has the panicle type flower. So there's some of the native range from Virginia Tech. Some of the other maps show it in a few other places as well, but you can see it's this plant of the Southeast. Some of the plants from the Southeast, from below Kentucky, as we've warmed, as our climate has warmed, Kentucky can now host those plants. So it's the Oakleaf hydrangea is native to will grow in zones 5 through 9. It's tolerant of dry soils, but it prefers medium moisture. It will not take wet soils. It gets to be about 6 to 8 feet tall with a spread of 6 to 8 feet. The blooms are in the spring, May through July. They're white to purplish pink and pyramidal shape. The heavier sun, if you've got a variety that has a big, heavy flower, giving that variety a little more sun will help it to have a stronger stem to hold the flower up. So varieties like Harmony and Snowflake, giving them a site with a little more sun will help hold those flowers up. It has long leaves that are 3 to 8 inches long and wide, and they've got lobes on them. That's why they're called Oakleaf hydrangea. They can get some powdery mildew, but one of the things that's really nice besides the blooms is that they do have good fall color, which can vary some depending on the variety, but it can be deep red, it can be orange to purple. And also once the leaves come off, it has a really nice exfoliating bark. These are pretty hardy down to a minus 10 degrees. So we don't lose them too often. In very unusual times like the clipper that we had come through this past December 22nd and 23rd, when the temperature drops 50 degrees, the plants aren't fully hardy when it's warm. And then when you get that sudden drop off in temperature, even plants like Oakleaf hydrangea can have some loss of bloom. They are low maintenance as hydrangeas go. You don't really want to prune them any more than you have to. You want to do your light pruning after they flower.
so that the next year's flower buds can form. You can leave those flower heads on there for the winter. There's on some of the varieties, they think that leaving the flower heads on protects the buds below for blooming the next year. And then they just cut them off in late winter or early spring, but you definitely don't want to cut off your flower buds. They will sucker, and you can remove those, and you can dig them up and use them to propagate the plant. You want to fertilize lightly. Generally, they fertilize hydrangeas in the early spring, and then again after a light fertilization after they bloom. And for these hydrangeas, they recommend, or the alternative, you can do it once in the mid-fall. If you prune plants, shrubs in the fall, it really helps strengthen the root system. It makes it a stronger plant. So the other way you can propagate these besides digging up the suckers is you can layer them. You can bend a stem down and scrape it in the early summer and put a little rooting powder on it, and then cover it with a bit of soil, hold it down with a brick or a rock. And once it roots and starts growing, you can cut it off and make another plant out of it. So reasons Oakleaf hydrangea may not bloom, I have to go a whole lot faster. They may not be old enough. They need to be about 5 years old before they bloom, or you may have accidentally cut off the flower buds, or the deer may have done some damage. Also, too much nitrogen can be a problem. Some of the cultivars, there's Alice that has long arching panicles, Snow Queen, which has a flower that really gets a lot of pink in it. It's showier than the species. Then there's little ones, which are great for the garden. There's Little Honey, which is got kind of a yellow-green leaf and stays small. It has a good fall color and peeling bark. That one got a Theodore Klein Award. Ruby Slippers got a Theodore Klein Award. It's a compact form, only 3 to 4 feet tall. And Peewee is only 3 to 4 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. It has smaller leaves, if you like that, with white flowers fading to pink. So there's a smooth hydrangea. Hydrangea arborescens is a native plant. It's found all across Kentucky. It grows from Pikeville to Paducah. Gets a height of 3 to 5 feet and a width of 3 to 6. We've talked about water on all of them. So these have large clusters of flowers that are white or cream. They can be kind of a lime green tinge, and they have made pink selections. So they're also available in a pink color. And they come in either a Mophead or a Lacecap flower. The wild type has a Lacecap flower. The Lacecaps will attract bumblebees, azures, hair streaks, lots of butterflies. They are a fairly cold susceptible species, however. They are listed as being drought tolerant, but they're not going to look very good in a drought. So it's better if you water them. There's the range of the arborescens. You can prune them back by 1/3 at the end of the winter and early spring and remove spindly side branches and dead wood. They can also be cut down to 4 inches, but when you really severely cut them, those stems are going to be weaker and your flowers are going to flop more. So if you do want to do cut flowers, that hard pruning will help you have a long stem for cut flowers. You can also do some selective pruning of new growth, and that will result in larger blooms that are 12 inches or larger. Unpruned plants will tend to have more flowers that are smaller and more uneven. You can do one application of fertilizer. In this case, some people recommend one application of fertilizer in late winter. And their propagation can be by suckers or layering with these as well. So why aren't they blooming? It can be because they need to be 2 years old to start blooming. If they are 2 years old and they're in too much shade, they may not be blooming. So they need that 4 hours of sun. Deer can take your buds off, your blooms off, and you may have pruned them off. So those are all things to look at if your smooth hydrangea is not blooming. Some of the cultivars that are out there, Annabelle was actually found in Anna, Illinois in the wild. It's a big mophead with sterile flowers. And then they've developed Incrediball, which has a huge flower that's 12 inches across. And those will be lime green and mature to pure white. And then there's a pink one that was developed called Invincible Spirit 2. Some people do not like this one that well, but it's out there. Some people really do like it. And there's the Haas Halo, which is also a smooth hydrangea, and it's the one that is really a big, attracts a lot of pollinators. If you want to keep that one shorter, you can cut it down to 4 feet in the spring and make it a shorter shrub in your garden. Another species is the bigleaf hydrangea, Hydrangea macrophylla, Hydrangea. I always say that wrong. Hydrangea. So these are your hardy zones 6 to 9, and they have a height and width of 4 to 6 feet. These come from Asia, from Japan. They're also called the French hydrangea. They plant them in sheltered areas with part shade. Full sun is tolerated if it's consistently moist, but these are probably the least tolerant of a dry area of all the hydrangeas. These are the ones that you can alter flower colors on these, blue or pink. They can, and the flowers can be in the Lacecap or the Mophead hortensia forms. These bloom on old wood. So if you cut heavily in the spring, you're going to cut off your blooms. However, there are some new cultivars that bloom on both new and old wood, and you can choose these varieties where late frosts are a problem, and you can still have some blooms on the new wood. So this is an expand your hort vocabulary. Remontant means that something flowers more than once in a season, and there are some of these that are repeat bloomers. Not all repeat bloomers are the same. So if you're going to plant them, it's good to do a little bit of research on which ones are the best. And there's some listed: Blushing Bride, David Ramsey, Decatur Blue, Penny Mac, Nantucket Blue. And if you want a Lacecap, the Endless Summer Twist and Shout is a good rebloomer. Okay. The plant introductions out of Watkinsville, Georgia, has a rating of top hortensias and Lacecaps. There's a whole series. There's from Proven Winter called Let's Dance, and some from Endless Summer, and some of these are very small, like the Pop Star only is it can be blue or pink, and it gets 18 to 36 inches. So you can look at some of those. There still can be some problems with winter damage. Some of the Endless Summer didn't bloom until August this year. So you just have to try them and see what works for you. But the nice thing is that they are developing small ones that don't need as much pruning. The shrub is small and works well in some areas of your landscape. The care, of course, watering, they will wilt in full sun in the middle of the day, even sometimes when they have good soil water. So, you know, having some dappled shade is really good. In mature plants, you can prune up to 1/3 of the older branches to the base in early spring and kind of keep the plant rejuvenated by taking out 1/3 of the older branches every year. Young plants can be trimmed back some after they bloom to enhance their structure, just to make their stems a little bit stronger. And then you can fertilize with late applications. So, you know, everybody fertilizes a little different, but some of them do it monthly until July. You don't want to fertilize after July because they may they may not go through the dormancy process like they should if you fertilize late in the summer. And some people recommend using a low phosphorus fertilizer, especially if you want your flowers to be blue. So the flower color is caused by changing soil pH, and it's actually taking up aluminum that makes it the blue color. And aluminum is more soluble when the pH is low. So for blue flowers, they're using wettable sulfur, a 1/2 cup per 10 square feet, to make flowers blue. But it's always good to get your soil tested and know where your pH is to begin with. If you get soil pHs below 4, you can damage your plant roots. On the other hand, if you want pink flowers, then you can use lime and get your pH up, and you will have pink flowers. Really, both lime and sulfur can take some time to work with the soil. It's good to do it in the fall for the next spring. And there is a drench. If you get in a pinch and you need to lower it quicker, you can try one of those 2 drenches there. And here's one of the hydrangeas, Nico Blue, of the big leaves, with a spread of 4 to 6 feet. Can have those, it can have beautiful big blooms or pink, depending on the soil pH. So with the big leaf hydrangea, if you don't have flowers, check to see if you cut the flower buds off. If you live in a cold climate, the flower buds may have been killed, too much shade or deer damage, too much nitrogen. Winter cold damage can kill them. I tried to come up with an acronym to remember if plants were if they bloom on old wood or new wood. And so the new wood bloomers, I say are P and S, PS, paniculata, and smooth hydrangeas. So here's the Panicle hydrangea. So it's the P, so it's going to be paniculata, it's going to be new wood. Now these are the toughest ones in the landscape. Out at Jackson, Tennessee, which is Western Tennessee, it's south of of where we live. I'm from Western Kentucky. They have rows of these. They have all kinds of varieties. They are out in full sun and they do not water them. And so this is the picture that's on there is from Jackson, Tennessee. So these are by far the toughest. If you've got to put something in full sun, these are the ones to plant. They have a showy flower. It's fragrant, large panicles that are conical, sharp. They have a sharp point on them, and they can be 6 to 8 inches long, or some of them are bigger than that. They begin white, and as they age, they can be a light green. They can turn to a pinkish, and some of them even develop a pretty deep rose color. Their bloom time is July to September. Their water is medium. They still prefer a moist, well-drained soil, but they will tolerate those dry conditions. And these are the ones that you see pruned up into a tree form, and they'll cut the side branches off, or a multi-stem shrub. So the grandiflora variety can reach 25 feet tall, and it's also very cold hardy. These are pretty winter hardy. They do well. On some of them, the branches may not be very stiff, and if you get a big flower, the branches will bend down. So you can try and find varieties that have a stiffer stem if you don't like that bending of the branches. But you can always go down to Jackson, Tennessee and observe a huge demonstration area of these, see what your favorites are. Pruning is not required. So you can prune dormant plants late fall through early spring. You can cut back to 2 buds and just make them look a little tidier and increase the size and the number of the blooms. You can also thin the plants to 5 to 10 primary shoots if you want really large flowers. You can do the tree form, and you can fertilize in late April and June, or once in the mid-fall. These also can be propagated by layering. I got fertilizing in there too, twice, sorry about that. So if these are not blooming, they may not be old enough. They may not have the 4 hours of sun they need. You may have the deer damage. You may have removed the buds through pruning. That's basically it. Maybe too much nitrogen. Or a really severe cold freeze, you can lose buds. In some areas, they've been listed as being slightly invasive. Not a big problem yet, but it may be in the future. There's Limelight. That's a pretty well-known one that's 6 to 8 feet tall and wide, with creamy white flowers that mature to a chartreuse lime. So that's a pretty neat color, and then become pink to rose before they fade off. Has a good fall leaf color that's red. Here's some others. There's Brighto Snowflake that has the showier sterile flowers. Vanilla Strawberry's been a popular one. I have one of these in my yard that develops a really pretty deep pinkish red color in the flower. And then the Great Star has fertile flowers that are attractive to pollinators. It gets fairly tall, 7 feet, but it has the rounded panicles of star-shaped flowers. So that's a neat one to look at. Some of them that get 12 feet tall are listed as Limelight Phantom and Floribunda. And then some that are 5 feet and smaller are Little Lime, Bobo, Bombshell, and Baby Lace. We planted Bobo at our courthouse and it did very well, stayed small. So that's nice in the landscape. There's quite a few paniculatas out there to look at the varieties and see what you like. There's a picture of Bobo, 2 to 4 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide. There's Little Lime that gets 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. and they have strong stems, so that's a nice characteristic. I'll talk a little bit about mountain hydrangea. It has good winter hardiness. It's native to Japan and Korea. We still have some problems sometimes here with blooming on it, but it is a little more cold tolerant one. It also blooms on the old wood. That's the PNS. I got it. That's the ones that bloom on old wood. So it's a more reliable one, slightly more reliable than the bigleaf hydrangea. They're fairly closely related. This is one that they use for tea. It's very sweet, and they call it the tea hydrangea. There is one called Tough Stuff that's from Proven Winter that's supposed to be 3 feet by 3 feet. So if you wanted a smaller mountain hydrangea to try, that's one to look at. And there's a tiny Tough Stuff that only gets to 2 feet tall. Okay, and on these, the flowers are also affected by aluminum uptake, so you can change them pink or blue. There's some more cultivars that you can look at. There's different sizes. I think that's one of the things, there's lots of cultivars that are out there, so do a little bit of homework and pick a size that works for your garden area, that you won't have to prune too much. I just threw this in. This is one that I bought recently, and I haven't had it long enough to know what I'm going to think of it. It may be a little bit, susceptible to winter damage. Some things listed as zone 6 and some 7 or 9. So it's Fairy Trail Bride, and they actually use several species to develop this one, but it's a trailer. So I have one, and I gave my neighbor one, and maybe in a year or two we'll tell you how we like it. It's just something cool to try. And there's a picture of the hydrangea, the bracted hydrangea, and that the deer don't like, and that's not that unattractive. I think it's fairly pretty. So if you have a lot of deer problems and you want to try one that the deer won't eat, that's something to look at. Thank you. This one here, this lady in red in this picture, that's at my house, and that is a big leaf hydrangea, and I get blooms on it maybe 1 or 2 years out of 5. So it's not very cold hardy, and I do lose my blooms on it, but it's pretty when it blooms.